Have you ever had to deal with a failure because someone tied some critical production process to their user credentials and then changed their password? Let's talk about service accounts and how they can be used to improve security and streamline automation in your cloud environment. Also called non user, non person, non human accounts, a service account is a special type of account used by applications or services to interact with other systems or services on behalf of the user or the application itself. This means that service accounts are typically used to automate tasks that require access to resources or services that are not publicly available and require some sort of authentication or authorization. And to clarify those, authorization or authn has to do with identity or who someone is, while authorization or authz has to do with permissions or what someone is allowed to do. For example, you have an ETL process that executes a Python script to move data from a source into your data warehouse. You want to run this somewhat frequently, let's say every day at midnight. But you don't want to have to log in to do this and do it manually every midnight. So you want to automate it so you can create a job like a cron job to run it every night at midnight. So normally you might go in and put in your user credentials into the job and execute it that way. But what happens when you leave the company, go on vacation, or something goes wrong with your user account? Well, the job's going to stop working. So to avoid this, you want to make sure you're using service accounts for all of your automated tasks. Instead of a username and password to authenticate, service accounts will use keys. There are different types of service accounts available depending on your cloud provider, but they usually include a system managed type where the keys and credentials are handled behind the scenes by the provider. For example, Azure's managed identities. And then there's user managed, where the rotation of keys is up to the users, such as Azure Service Principals. GCP, AWS, Kubernetes, and other providers have similar account designs. In order to reduce the risk of unintended application failures when rotating service account keys, avoid key creation whenever possible by using the managed options. If you do have user-managed service account keys, ensure that you rotate the keys frequently. The recommended baseline is usually 90 days, but you might want to rotate more frequently than that. Additionally, try and limit the access of each service account to a very specific scope. Should an account become compromised, it won't have access to your whole system. Some common scenarios where you might find a service account. First, if your application needs to access APIs or services that require authentication, you can use a service account to authenticate the application rather than requiring each user to provide their credentials. Second, if you want to automate tasks that require access to resources or services that are not publicly available. This is more secure than relying on the user credential for access, because the service account can be assigned specific permissions and roles, which can be used to control the level of access that the service account has to different resources or services. It doesn't risk losing access like a user account would should the user's password or access change. And it can be shared between multiple team members to administer without needing to transfer processes between them. Of course, on the other side, the account isn't tied to an individual, so you can't know who was behind an action the account takes. So it's important to limit who has access to administer the service accounts. When you need to scale your solution, service accounts will be essential to expand more team involvement. And for more on how to scale up, be sure to watch this video next.